For you guys today as a mother, a heartbroken mother. A mother that's full of anger, rage, questions why. We poured into her. We poured into her education. But as I said in that courtroom today, the people I really felt sorry for was those boys. I felt sorry for them because nobody obviously didn't pour into them. Nobody told them that they were loved. Nobody told them that you can do anything, like I constantly preach to my daughters. My daughter was 24. Criminal justice was her background. She graduates May 13th from Loyola. Education is what we preach. As crazy as this may sound, I pray for their family.
It was supposed to be a normal night. For Aréanah Preston, a dedicated officer with the Chicago Police Department, the shift had ended like many others before it. After hours of serving her community, she was finally heading home, just a short walk to the place where she should have felt safest. The streets of Chicago were quiet in the early hours, the kind of silence that usually signals the end of a long day. For most people, this would have been just another routine moment, walking home, thinking about rest, tomorrow, and life beyond the uniform. But this night would be different. Aréanah wasn't just any officer. She was known for her determination, her discipline, and her commitment to making a difference. Friends and colleagues described her as someone who had worked hard for her badge, someone who believed deeply in what she did. That's what makes this story so difficult. Because even those who dedicate their lives to protecting others aren't always protected themselves. Somewhere along that short walk home, something went terribly wrong. What should have been a safe and familiar path turned into a moment that would shock an entire city. A routine turned into a tragedy that no one saw coming. The news spread quickly. Fellow officers, community members, and people across the country struggled to process what had happened. Questions filled the air. How could this happen? How could someone so committed to protecting others become a victim herself? And perhaps the most haunting question of all: how does a simple walk home end in something so devastating? This is the beginning of a story that would leave a lasting impact on a city, and a reminder of how fragile even the most ordinary moments can be. Backhand index pointing right if you want to follow this powerful and heartbreaking story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that matter. Long before that tragic night in Chicago, Aréanah Preston was building a life defined by purpose. Becoming an officer with the Chicago Police Department wasn't something she took lightly. It required discipline, training, and a deep commitment to serving others. Those who knew her said she approached it with focus and determination, always pushing herself to do better. She wasn't just wearing a uniform. She was chasing a goal. Friends described her as driven, someone who believed in growth and education. In addition to her work as an officer, she was also focused on her future, working toward further achievements and building a life beyond the badge. To her family, she was more than an officer. She was a daughter, a friend, someone full of ambition and plans for what was ahead. That's what makes stories like this so difficult to understand. Because behind every headline is a real person, a life filled with moments, relationships, and dreams that don't make it into the news. On the night everything changed, there was no warning, no sign that anything was different from the routine she had followed so many times before. A shift completed, a walk home, a moment that should have passed without notice. But instead, it became the point where everything changed. For the community, the loss was immediate and deeply felt. Fellow officers were left trying to process how someone who had dedicated her life to service could be taken in such a sudden and unexpected way. And for her family, the reality was even harder to accept. Because the person they knew, the one with plans, goals, and a future, was gone far too soon. Backhand index pointing right if you want to understand what happened next and how this moment unfolded. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next chapter. In the early hours of that morning, the streets of Chicago were quiet, just as they had been countless nights before. For Aréanah Preston, the routine was familiar. Her shift with the Chicago Police Department had ended, and she was heading home. It was a simple walk, one she had likely taken many times before. Nothing about it seemed unusual. But somewhere along that short distance, something went wrong. Details that later emerged revealed that the situation escalated quickly. What should have been a safe moment, an officer returning home after work, turned into something no one could have anticipated. The stillness of the night was broken, and within moments everything changed. Emergency responses followed, but the reality of what had happened began to spread rapidly. The news reached fellow officers first, then the wider community. Shock turned into grief. Because this wasn't just another incident. This was someone who had stood on the front lines, someone who had committed her life to protecting others. Now, the very thing she worked to prevent had happened to her. As investigators began piecing together the timeline, questions surfaced. How did this happen so quickly? Could anything have prevented it? And why did such a routine moment turn into tragedy? For those who knew Aréanah, the hardest part wasn't just understanding what happened. It was accepting that a life full of purpose and potential had been cut short in such an unexpected way. The city felt it. Her department felt it. Her family felt it most of all. And as the investigation moved forward, the focus shifted toward finding answers. Answers that would bring clarity to a moment that still didn't make sense. Backhand index pointing right if you want to learn how investigators responded and what happened next. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next chapter. As the news spread across Chicago, the impact was immediate and overwhelming. The loss of Aréanah Preston wasn't just another headline. It was deeply personal for many. Fellow officers from the Chicago Police Department gathered in silence, trying to process what had happened to one of their own. A sense of shock quickly turned into grief. Vigils began to form. Candles lit the night as community members came together to honor her life. Friends, family, and colleagues shared stories, memories of her determination, her kindness, and the future she had been working toward. For many, it still didn't feel real. How could someone who had just finished protecting others be taken in such a sudden and tragic way? The question echoed throughout the city. Flags were lowered, tributes poured in. Messages of support came from across the country. People who had never met Aréanah felt the weight of the loss simply because of what she represented, a young officer with purpose, taken far too soon. For her family, the grief was beyond words. They weren't just mourning an officer. They were mourning a daughter, a loved one, someone whose life had only just begun to unfold. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Authorities worked to understand exactly what had happened that night, determined to bring clarity and accountability. But even as details slowly emerged, one thing remained clear. This wasn't just a moment that affected one family or one department. It affected an entire community. Because when something like this happens, it reminds everyone how quickly life can change and how fragile even the most routine moments truly are. Backhand index pointing right if you want to hear the final chapter and the lasting impact of this tragedy. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. In the weeks and months that followed, the city of Chicago continued to feel the absence of Aréanah Preston. But alongside the grief, something else began to take shape. A legacy. For the Chicago Police Department, Aréanah was more than just an officer. She represented dedication, courage, and the belief that one person could make a difference. Her fellow officers carried that memory with them every day, on patrol, in briefings, and in the quiet moments when the reality of her loss still felt close. Her family, while facing unimaginable pain, chose to honor her life by focusing on who she was, not just what happened. They spoke about her dreams, her determination, and the path she had been building for herself. Because her story didn't begin with tragedy. It began with purpose. Community members also found ways to remember her through gatherings, tributes, and conversations that kept her name alive. In doing so, they ensured that she would not be defined solely by that one moment, but by the life she lived before it. And that matters, because behind every tragic story is a person whose impact continues long after they're gone. The question that began this story, how a simple walk home could end in tragedy, may never fully have an answer that brings comfort. But what remains is something stronger, a reminder of the importance of every moment, a recognition of those who dedicate their lives to others, and a legacy that refuses to be forgotten. Aréanah Preston may be gone, but her story continues to resonate, not just in Chicago, but everywhere people hear it. Backhand index pointing right if this story touched you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that deserve to be remembered.